We have cut rates for businesses big and small. That is why the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, do not support the tax hikes proposals
I beg your pardon?
Of any of these
parties.
They
supported our small business tax cuts. You better go read your press releases, Mr. Harper.
Gentlemen, I'm going to bring the gavel down on that one. That's the end of our first segment, our first question. We now move on to question two, and this one's about Canada on the world stage. Mr. Ignatieff, you get the first chance to respond to this. Mr. Layton, you're getting the second chance to respond. So this is the one-on-one between the two of you. And here is our questioner from Mississauga. Roll tape, please.
My name is Basalka Amelko from Mississauga. I would like to know, what is your vision for Canada on the world stage? Do you believe that our country should have a more prominent and active role internationally? If so, what will you, if elected Prime Minister, do to regain Canada's positive influence on the international arena?
Okay, a reminder, we start this one-on-one with Mr. Ignatieff and Mr. Layton. Go ahead, Mr. Ignatieff.
Thank you, Vaselka. Canada lost its seat on the Security Council of the United Nations. First time it ever happened. Canada made a fiasco of the G8. Things that we need to do on the international stage. Canada needs to stand for great values abroad, the same values it stands for at home, particularly democracy, defending and promoting democracy around the world, but you can't do that abroad unless you believe in it and promote it at home. And Mr. Harper has betrayed our democracy at home, and I don't think he can stand up for democracy and freedom abroad.
Mr. Layton.
Well, Vasalka raises a very important question. It's on the mind of a lot of Canadians. I mean, they just recently watched the Conservative-dominated Senate block a bill to get affordable drug medication to Africa from Canada. Can you believe that? It had passed the House of Commons. No wonder the rest of the world is looking at Canada and saying, what the heck is going on? We've got two parties here running in this election, the Liberals and Conservatives, who have flatlined our foreign aid budget. That's wrong. If we're doing so well economically, as they like to claim, then at least we should be doing something about the poorest parts of the world. We should be bringing our troops home from Afghanistan. In fact, Canadians were expecting that to happen this summer. But instead, in a deal cooked up between Mr. Ignatieff and Mr. Harper, we're now going to be there another 3 years.
And
we've lost our reputation on the environment.
Let's get a response on the Afghanistan issue.
Brave men and women fought and died in Afghanistan. You, Mr. Layton, have said we ought to stay engaged in Afghanistan, but you can't have it both ways. We're going to bring the combat troops home this summer. We fully support that decision. No more combat for Canadian soldiers. But the one thing Afghans want, desperately need, is security. So I think it's right for Canada to stay in a training mission out of harm's way, helping Afghans defend themselves. You can't have it both ways, Mr. Layton. You say you want to get engaged in Afghanistan, stay there for humanitarian reasons, but the one thing they need is security, and I want to make sure that Afghans can stand on their own feet, defend their own country, women get to school, we can do some aid and develop, but you can't do any of that unless you help them to defend themselves.
Well, Mr. Ignatieff, these are exactly the arguments Mr. Harper makes, and I'm hearing them from you now. I don't agree. I don't believe this is the way forward in Afghanistan. Canada's voice for peace and aid and development is being lost in all of this focus on the military aspect. And of course we support our troops, we all do. In fact, I wish that the Conservatives would provide, and of course we support our troops, we all do. In fact, I wish that the Conservatives would provide more in the way of support to our veterans. But I have another issue to raise with you, Mr. Ignatieff, while we have the floor.
Just before you do in Afghanistan, what are you saying, Mr. Layton? You're saying these brave men and women gave their lives, and we walk away from Afghanistan and try to pretend to the Canadian people it didn't happen? We are where we are, sir. And I think it's responsible leadership to say, let's help the Afghans defend themselves for 3 more years. Creates the possibility for us to do any humanitarian good in that country. And then, of course, we need to focus in other parts of the world. But you can't walk away, Mr. Layton, pretend it didn't happen. It did happen, and it happened to this country.
This is the same argument that we've been hearing for years about the mission in Afghanistan and why we called for the troops to be brought back and for a new approach to be used, and we still think that a new approach is needed there.
What do you say to our allies? What do you say to our allies?
Here is the other issue I want to raise with you. I've been listening to you make proposals in this campaign, and I have to just ask myself, how can people trust what you're saying today when your actions are so contrary to what you're offering to Canadians? I mean, there you were, supporting Mr. Harper on this massive program of corporate tax cuts. And now suddenly you're against them, the very ones you voted for. In the middle of the recession, you helped him ram through the HST on the backs of the people of British Columbia and Ontario. The worst possible thing you could have done to people trying to get things done at and meet bills. And then you support him 100 times without getting anything in return. I mean, you're Mr. Harper's best friend. And now here you are offering yourself as an alternative. It really causes people to wonder, can we trust him?
I'm thinking if Veselko asked this question is wondering why you changed the subject. Jack, we're talking about Canada's place in the world. We've got to lead the United Nations. We've lost our influence there. We took 4 years to establish a relationship in China because Mr. Harper muffed his opportunities there.
Well, then why did you freeze the foreign aid budget in your proposal to Canadians, if I might ask you that?
We are going to sustain our international engagement. Mr. Harper walked away from Africa. I want Canada back in Africa, helping us, for example. I want, you know, last Friday, this is the Canada I love. I'm getting on my bus, and a young woman, I said, what are you doing for Easter? She says, I'm going to Kenya to teach school. This is the internationalism a good Liberal government wants to harness and engage. And in fact, if they do 150 hours of service overseas, we'll knock $1,500 off their student debt. That's the kind of vision of Canada in the world that I support. And that's what we should be talking about.
Last word on the one-on-one to Mr.
Well, unfortunately, of course, your party was a part of causing our vision to be in, our reputation to be in such trouble because of our massive increase in greenhouse gas emissions under the administration of your party for 13 years. And of course, we've had 5 more years now from Mr. Harper, where the rest of the world looks at Canada and says, in terms of the climate change crisis, one of the most important international issues, Canada is a pariah. We're nowhere. We're not seen as being contributors. We're not seen as moving the agenda ahead at all. Why? Because of these 2 administrations that have been in place for far too long.
Gentlemen,
reason why Ottawa is broken.
We open up the discussion now to all 4 of you. Mr. Harper, do you want your first kick
Let me talk about some of the things Canada...
To all 4 of you. Mr. Harper, do you want your first kick
Let me talk about some of the things Canada is doing in the world. Obviously, the training mission in Afghanistan is going to be very important to build on the sacrifice that our brave men and women in uniform have made. We have the largest per capita mission to Haiti, an important country that needs our help. Canada right now, myself and President Kikwete of Tanzania are chairing the World Health Organization's panel on child and maternal health, where we're getting billions of dollars invested towards helping the health of the most needy people on this planet. We have Canadians leading a mission, a United Nations mission in Libya. We have climate change, you know, the Copenhagen Accord. Canada was a lone voice for a long time saying all emitters had to be included in a climate change pact. Now we have one that's moving in that direction. So I think on issue after issue, Canada's engaged, Canada's contributing, and this should not be a matter of partisan debate. All parties should support a strong role for Canada in the world.
Monsieur Doucette.
I would say that government foreign policy is a copy of the Bush administration foreign policy. And Quebec cannot recognize itself with that kind of foreign policy. In the past, we had the list that corresponded to the principles of the Quebec society and the values of the Quebec society. But when I look at the kind of foreign policy you're developing, and it has links with the people, your organization, your financing are stopped, I should say, financing like chaos and rights and democracy, because they're not corresponding to your straight, narrow ideology. Could you realize that that kind of foreign policy is a shame to the Canadian history?
What we're doing on foreign policy, on things like child and maternal health, are making sure that foreign aid dollars go to actual services to poor people in the world, not just to talk, not just to conferences. That's why we're making changes to foreign aid, to make it more effective. But, you know, when you talk about our values and Quebecers' values, Mr. Doucette, let me just say this. You know, right now in Libya, we have an international force protecting a civilian population from atrocities. That's being commanded by a Canadian, General Charles Bouchard. I met with his father in Saguenay. They are as good Quebecers as you are, Mr. Doucette.
Mr.
But Quebecers, remember, you wanted to go in Iraq, and Mr. Ignatieff was supporting that also. That we do remember.
The fact remains, Mr. Harper, you're the first prime minister in the history